Welcome back to the TigerM Hangar. This is Mike, and happy Friday, everybody. Hope everybody is doing well. Today I want to talk to you about what's it going to be like collecting in the future. 25 years in the future. 2048, closer to 2050. Most of us will probably be in our 70s. There'll be some issues to deal with. And a lot of people talk about getting aged out of collecting, and that as you get older, when you retire, that you wouldn't want to collect. I actually disagree with that, and I'll give you a few points there. But before we get into all this, I do want to say one thing. I want to make two predictions about the timeline that it's going to take Fans Toys to get their Devastator to market, to be released. And the first prediction is that we'll have 2 colonoscopies during that time frame and 3 grandkids. But anyway, let's get into talking about what it's like collecting in 25 years or in our 70s. Coming up! All right, so the first point I want to make is that there's going to be less G1 product. Less G1 product out there getting created for our targeted demographic, our market. And I know a lot of people that collect a little bit of everything. They like to touch on a little bit of every era. But I did a quick search here on ShowZ, just kind of show some of the products that are getting made for Beast Wars. And with that, you can see they're going into the next era. Beast Wars was more or less the next era. You get into G2 recolors, but that was still G1 molds. But you look at yet another era, you got stuff like Transformers Prime, you got all these different eras that are starting to see some attention, they're starting to see some focus, they're going that direction, and that's evidenced by looking at this. This is another screen capture of ShowZ, kind of showing this is the APC toys, but they're making more or less KOs or reproductions of the original Prime series that is selling relatively well, and people like these. But it kind of shows that we're moving in that next direction. There's going to be less G1 stuff. Another bit of evidence that there's going to be less G1. Hasbro acting like they completely forgot G1 exists next year. And this is a trend. This is one of those things that kind of rhymes. It's a trend that we saw back in G1, going to G2, going into Beast Wars, going into all this stuff. It's like they left G1 behind for a full decade until 2007. So you really went from 1996, 2007, no G1. And will there be a resurgence in maybe 25 years, 27 years of G1? I doubt it. I actually think there'll still be product coming out. There'll be something somewhere, but very few and far between. And it won't be like now where we're getting inundated with 8 pre-orders in a week. Or if you're collecting mainline stuff, you're inundated with 70 pre-orders in a month. On top of less G1 product, there's going to be less companies making this stuff. There's a lot of companies right now that are just basically reissuing old products until they just get tired of doing it. Until the market has either been overly saturated with those characters or they just don't feel like doing it anymore. It's not profitable. It reached a non-profitability point. This thing here, this is a screenshot from TF Source that shows everything they've carried. All the companies that they have carried in the past. It's a good resource in here. I also want to point out there's 52 companies. Most of them do make Masterpiece or upgrade kits or something along those lines. And even looking at some of the Legends ones, they have a Masterpiece offering in there too. So it's kind of fun to see all that, but we are seeing a shrinking and diminishing number of companies that actually make products, which isn't really good, but 25 years from now, they'll be even less. We are currently at the pinnacle of 80s nostalgia, targeted brand marketing, targeting us. These companies that exist right now that are targeting people in our age group, there's kind of probably another 10 years of healthy amount of products coming for 80s nostalgia. It's going to taper off after that. That's one of those things that we see that right now there's a lot. And it looks like there's never going to be an end to it, but there will be an end to it pretty much probably 10 years from now it tapers off. But in 25 years, there'll be very little targeting the 80s market. Kind of see that with the 60s G.I. Joes. I'm not saying these things aren't valuable, but they're just not that sought after. And there's not a huge market of 6 different companies or 52 different companies trying to recreate these and make them in different ways, shapes, or forms because, well, we're going to see in the future why that market is shrinking. And our markets will be shrinking too. So we're going to start seeing less collectors. That's the next point here. I've already made a discussion video about the Masterpiece market is shrinking, then all the reasons why. But there's probably even more reasons than I even discussed on why it's shrinking. But we are going to talk about this and how there's less and less collectors. Now, that's not going to be just for Masterpiece Transformers. There's going to be less collectors for everything that is nostalgic for 80s in 25 years. And looking in the future, when we're in our 70s, there are going to be far less. But not for the reasons that you might think. One of the reasons there'll be less collectors collecting there's going to be other priorities. Other priorities that you will need to spend your money on. And with that, maybe other priorities that you are more interested in than collecting. Maybe this is something that's here and now for you, or maybe you're still in it this whole time, but there's going to be a lot of other priorities. Priority shifts, changes, and adjustments. That's just the way it is, and that's just how life is. Although it may sound like the same point, it's just other interests. You might develop other interests that you just like doing that's not as hard as tracking down and collecting toys, vintage toys, modern toys, Masterpiece Transformers, and all those kinds of things. This is one of the things when you're in your 70s, you might just be relaxing, maxing, and relaxing. But I gotta tell you, I think the beach is just way overrated. We do have to talk about this. Death is definitely going to be a reason that we have a shrinking market, less collectors, less people that are going to be interested in this stuff, because you start looking 25 years out, how many of us are going to make it? It's always sad to hear someone in the community has passed away. I know I watched a few live streams where one of the people that was part of that live stream has passed away, and they always remember that person. And that's kind of a feel good to remember people that were part of the community that had passed on years ago. But this is just a reality, a sad fact of reality that some collectors are going to be passing away over the next 25 years. And it's a reality we have to live with, but that's why we have a shrinking market. And going back to those old 60s G.I. Joes, I mean, a lot of those people that collected that aren't alive anymore. And that's an example that gets brought up by people like Justice Curie that say that those things don't fetch the money they used to. And there's not as much interest. Part of the reason is because those people aren't alive anymore. And there's only two certainties in life: taxes and death. So next I want to get into a concept of aging out. And if you kind of hear other people talking about, as people get older, they just stop collecting because they're just too old to collect. They don't want to collect anymore. I disagree that just because you're 70 years old, that you're just too mature to collect, or you just don't feel like collecting anymore just because you're 70. If you are still interested, then it makes a whole lot of sense. I got a couple of examples of what some elderly people that I know collect, and even when I was a kid, I'd see them collect it. I noticed that there's elderly people that collect figurines. That's another thing. When you hear somebody use the term figurine, I just assume they're over 60 years old, because that's a term that we don't really use in the collecting community. So figurine tells me it's like an elderly lady that collects these non-movable, there's no articulation in them, but these little figurines, hear no evil, speak no evil, and see no evil frogs. I've seen those. A lot of people collect those, but a lot of these little different types of figurines. My grandmother did it. They collect plates, and there's other kinds of things that are collected by elderly people. But I don't think people stop collecting when they get older. I think that when they get older, they actually cherish their memories. And having stuff like this, that they remember certain times, I think they keep that a lot more. If you look at elderly people that you know, you probably see them latch on to certain memorabilia pieces that remind them of simpler time or when they were younger. But it's also kind of when you see people that collect this old vintage stereo equipment, when modern stereo equipment would do a lot better job. And of course there's arguments, oh no, that old stuff's better. But when you see them collecting this kind of stuff, that is when you see a 70-year-old person holding on to this kind of stuff because they like it. It reminds them of a different time. I see the same thing going on with the Masterpiece Transformers. A lot of times you see older people, elderly people that have a bigger budget. I mean, it could go both ways. It depends on how you handle your finances today and tomorrow, whether or not you'll have a decent budget for collecting in the future. And that's one of the other alternatives that people say, no, they're not going to have the money to collect when you retire. You're barely going to be scraping by. We're going to get into that. But with that, a lot of times you do see elderly people that have a much larger budget than someone that's in their 20s and 30s, and sometimes in their 40s. Generally, when you get into the 50s, they say that is your prime earning years, as your 50s. And we'll see if that's true for you, and probably not for me, but anyway, let's get to the next one. The next thing is, I think that people are going to have more time. When you retire, and you're in your 70s, you have more time to enjoy your collection. And with that, you don't have as many obstacles to overcome time-wise. And so that is a situation that you find. I find myself, I don't work 90-hour weeks anymore, so I have more time to enjoy my collection, make videos, those kinds of things. And with that, I believe that the vast majority of collectors that find that they have more time in the future when they're retired will be wanting to collect. And maybe they're wanting to sell and fund their collection that way. And looking at just current elderly people that are in their 70s right now, they cherish the past. A lot of elderly that I know cherish the past, look to the past, love to tell the stories about the past. But that's why antique stores exist. Antique stores exist because elderly people do like to purchase that kind of stuff, and will be still wanting to purchase vintage stuff. Vintage stuff, modern iterations of vintage items. It's still going to be a thing, just not as big as it is right now. So the next point is pricing. Prices are going to be outrageous. Now, with the current inflation going crazy, you can estimate, if you just looked back the last 25 years to now, prices should be expected to at least, at minimum, double, if not triple. Unless we go through a 6-year depression, that could reset prices, and that would be a good thing for the consumer, except, of course, we'd have 25% less jobs in existence. That's a big problem. But with that, I really do see inflation taking over, and actually, inflation is the biggest problem that faces the U.S. for sure, but probably every other country. Inflation right now is a problem, and they're trying to make it look like they have a control over this inflation, but you have to have control over fiscal monetary systems. You have to have control over government spending, and we don't have that. We don't have that in the U.S. We don't have that in very many countries at all, to tell you the truth, and it's only going to get worse year after year after year until we see something that's akin to hyperinflation. You'll know we've seen hyperinflation when you have a $100 McDonald's cheeseburger, but we're not there yet. But now there's one of the franchises was charging $18 for a Big Mac meal. Obviously, they're overcharging, but this is the beginning. This is where they start feeding you this information to set you up and prepare you for what's to come, which is rampant, massive inflation. So over the next 25 years, doubling in prices would be a good thing, but some stuff has doubled just in the last year. I could see 20 times, 50 times the price on certain items in the future. And if you're in the U.S. and with the next 25 years, we might lose the world reserve currency, as the BRICS nations, that's their goal, to trade in other currencies other than the dollar. And that's the way, the reason they exist. Look into that if you want to know more. And the last point about collecting, because it's kind of an up and down kind of thing here, is health. If you are spending all your time just trying to get by, you don't feel good, you don't feel healthy, you don't take care of yourself, your 70s, you might not be feeling good. And collecting's probably not going to be top of your priority. And I actually have people that tell me that they're ill, they don't feel well, but being able to collect makes them feel better. So that's kind of cool too. But if you're too busy with your dialysis and chemo and all those kinds of things, and you just aren't feeling your tip-top shape, collecting's not going to be your number one priority anymore. I mean, that's just the way it is. Collecting will not be your number one top priority if you don't feel well. So try to get in shape, stay in shape, and at least try to do a little bit of extra exercise and eat right. And I'm talking to myself. So those are my predictions for 25 years from now. Collecting in our 70s, what is it going to be like? But I really do want to hear, what do you think about the future of collecting Masterpiece Transformers decades from now? Seeing that we've already been in it for 2 decades, over 2 decades of collecting Masterpiece Transformers. They've been around. What will the next 2.5 decades look like? And what will those surprises hold for us? I think I've hit it pretty close to the nail on the head, but of course I want to hear from you. Anyway, let me know in the comments below, like and subscribe, and Tidy Hanger out.